The bells of Northgate Preparatory Academy did not so much ring as they chimed, a cascade of harmonized metallic notes that spoke of old money and older traditions. They echoed across manicured lawns, green as currency, and danced off the stoic, gargoyle-adorned faces of the Gothic Revival architecture. To most of its students, this sound was the rhythm of their lives, as familiar and comforting as a maternal heartbeat. To Luca Romano, it was a constant, melodic reminder that he was an alien on a gilded planet. He sat in the cavernous dining hall, a cathedral of dark wood and stained glass, named for a railroad tycoon who had died a century ago. Sunlight, fractured into jewels of ruby and sapphire by the towering windows, painted shifting patterns on the polished floor. The air hummed with the easy, boisterous chatter of teenagers who had known each other since their first polo lessons. Luca's table, a long stretch of dark, gleaming oak, was an island of silence in the sea of noise. He ate with a practiced, deliberate slowness, his fork and knife moving with a precision that seemed out of place. It was a habit born not of etiquette but of necessity, a way to impose a small, controllable order on the vast, unpredictable chaos of his new life. He was a scholarship kid. The words were never spoken aloud, not directly to him, but they clung to the air like a cheap perfume. They were in the way a triad of blazer-clad boys glanced at his shoes, perfectly polished, but a season out of style. They were in the slight, almost imperceptible hesitation when a teacher called his name from the roll. Romano. It sounded different here, heavier, more ethnic than the Andersons, the Pembrokes, and the Sterlings. Grant Sterling, in particular, seemed to have made Luca his personal project. He was the princeling of Northgate, his father a board member, his lineage tracing back to one of the school's founding families. He possessed the casual cruelty that only comes from a life devoid of consequence. Today, as he passed Luca's table with his entourage, he let his leather satchel swing just a little too wide. It clipped Luca's glass of water, sending a shock of cold across the table and into Luca's lap. "Oh, watch it," Grant said, his voice a perfect symphony of feigned concern and underlying mockery. His friends, two shadows named Kyle and Ben, snickered on cue. "Clumsy of me. You'll have to forgive me, Romano. I'm not used to navigating such crowded spaces." The table was, of course, empty save for Luca. The insult, like the spilled water, was meant to soak in. Luca didn't look up. He simply took his napkin, methodically blotted the water from his gray uniform trousers, and placed the damp cloth neatly beside his plate. He didn't acknowledge them. He didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. This, he had learned, was a small form of power. His silence was a shield they did not know how to penetrate. It infuriated them. "Too good to talk to us?" Kyle prodded, stepping closer. Luca continued eating his chicken, which was now regrettably dry. He focused on the geometric pattern of the parquet floor, on the way the light from the window illuminated dust motes dancing in the air. He could feel their eyes on him, hot and expectant. He could feel the weight of their collective privilege pressing down. Defeated by the wall of indifference, Grant finally scoffed. "Whatever. Let's go. Some people just have no class." They swaggered off, their laughter trailing behind them, a sound as sharp and unpleasant as breaking glass. Luca remained still for a long moment after they were gone, his food forgotten. The loneliness was a physical presence, a cold weight in his chest. He was a ghost haunting the edges of their gilded world, seen only when they wished to torment him. It was then that the crash happened. A few tables away, a small, first-year student with glasses as thick as bottle bottoms tripped over his own feet, sending his entire lunch tray clattering to the floor. The sound was explosive in the grand hall. A burst of mashed potatoes, a splatter of gravy, the sad roll of a green apple across the tiles. A few students laughed. Most simply ignored it, turning back to their conversations. The little boy's face crumpled, turning a bright, mortified crimson as tears welled in his eyes. For a moment, no one moved. The janitor was at the far end of the hall and the staff seemed to be occupied. The boy just stood there, paralyzed by his own humiliation. Luca pushed his chair back. The sound of its legs scraping against the floor was loud in his small bubble of silence. He walked over to the disaster zone, his steps even and unhurried. He knelt down, ignoring the splattered food, and began picking up the larger pieces of debris, the plastic plate, the carton of milk. "It's okay," Luca said, his voice quiet but clear. Happens to everyone. The little boy sniffled, wiping his nose on the sleeve of his oversized blazer. They're all looking. Let them look, Luca said, not glancing up. He picked up the errant apple, wiped it clean with the corner of his own napkin, and held it out. Here, you can have mine. The boy took the apple, his small fingers brushing against Luca's. Thanks, he whispered. Luca gave him a small, rare smile and went back to his table, leaving the boy to the eventual care of the approaching janitor. He didn't notice the pair of eyes that had watched the entire exchange. From the faculty table near the dais, Ms. Anya Sharma, the new history teacher, lowered her cup of tea. She was a sharp woman with intelligent eyes and a way of seeing past the polished veneers of Northgate's student body. She had seen Grant Sterling's casual bullying, and she had just seen Luca Romano's quiet act of grace. She made a mental note. There was more to the silent boy than met the eye. Later that evening, the solitude of Luca's dorm room was a welcome balm. It was a small Spartan space, but it was his. The only personal touch was a worn, leather-bound journal on his desk, its pages filled not with words, but with intricate, complex architectural sketches. He could lose himself for hours in the precise lines of a flying buttress, the mathematical perfection of a dome, the elegant sweep of a grand staircase. It was a private language, a world he had built for himself where everything made sense, where every angle had a purpose and every structure was sound. His phone buzzed, displaying a familiar name, Papa. He answered. Luca, how is school? The voice on the other end was a low rumble, laced with the melodic accent of Sicily. It was a voice that could command armies or soothe a crying child with equal ease. It's fine, Papa, Luca said, his standard reply. He sketched a Doric column as he spoke, his hand moving with fluid certainty. Fine is the word a man uses when he does not wish to speak of a thing. Are you eating well? Are you learning? Yes, Papa. The food is nutritious. The classes are challenging. There was a pause. Luca knew his father could read the silences between words better than most could read a book. I spoke with your headmaster, Mr. Albright. He seems a decent man for an American. He is. Good. Remember what I have told you. You are there for one reason, to build a life your mother would be proud of, a life of legitimacy, of honor. There was a weight to the word honor when his father said it, a meaning that went far deeper than the school's codified rules. Do not let the small-mindedness of others distract you from this. Ricorda, il leone non si preoccupa dell'opinione della pecora. I remember, Papa, Luca murmured, the phrase as familiar as his own name. Remember, the lion does not concern himself with the opinion of the sheep. It was easy to say, harder to live when you felt like a sheep surrounded by wolves. I will call you Thursday. Be well, my son. You too, Papa. The line went dead. Luca closed his journal and leaned back, the silence of the room returning, heavier than before. Miles away, in a study that smelled of leather, cigar smoke, and power, Don Marcello the Shadow Romano placed his phone down on a massive mahogany desk. The room was the nerve center of a hidden empire, but at this moment, it was just a father's sanctuary. He swiveled his chair to look at the portrait that dominated the wall. It was of his late wife, Imani. She was beautiful, a radiant black woman with eyes that held a universe of laughter and a jawline that hinted at an unshakable strength. It was her grace Luca had inherited. His phone chimed with an incoming text message. It was not from a business associate or a capo regime. The sender was an untraceable number, his silent observer at Northgate, a man whose official title was assistant groundsman. The message was simple, clinical. The Sterling boy is becoming a problem. Marcello's face, which had been warm with paternal affection moments ago, underwent a tectonic shift. The warmth receded, replaced by something glacial and dangerous. The lines around his eyes deepened, not from age, but from the weight of countless decisions that balanced lives and fortunes. Sterling. He knew the name. A peacock of a businessman, rotten to the core, with a history that was best left buried. And now his progeny was tormenting Imani's son. He stared at the portrait, at the woman who had seen past the shadow and loved the man. He had promised her Luca would have a different life, a legitimate one, built on a foundation of education and merit, not fear and fealty. He had sent his son into the heart of the world that had always excluded people like them, armed only with his own bright mind and a quiet heart. But a promise to the living was one thing. A promise to the dead was sacred. And protecting his son, Imani's son, was the most sacred vow of all. His gaze hardened into stone, his dark eyes filled with a cold, terrifying promise. The sheep had annoyed the lion, and the lion was beginning to stir. The brief moment of recognition from Ms. Sharma acted as a stone cast into the stagnant pool of Grant Sterling's ego. In her history class, a seminar on the architecture of power, Luca had remained silent for weeks, absorbing information with an unnerving stillness. Then, during a discussion on the Roman pantheon's oculus, Ms. Sharma had posed a question about structural integrity that stumped the class. After a long silence, Luca had answered. He spoke not just of the compressed concrete, but of the oculus's symbolic meaning, a gateway to the heavens, an eye of Jupiter looking down. He connected it to the psychological impact on those who stood beneath it, the feeling of being both humbled and watched. He spoke with a quiet authority that was impossible to ignore. Ms. Sharma had beamed. An outstanding insight, Mr. Romano, truly. Grant, who had offered a textbook answer moments before, felt the praise denied him as a personal slight. It was incomprehensible. The scholarship kid, the charity case, had not only shown him up, but had earned the genuine admiration of the teacher Grant was trying to impress. The fragile hierarchy of his world had been challenged. His response, honed by a lifetime of unearned superiority, was not to improve himself, but to tear the challenger down. The quiet war of microaggressions was over. It was time for a public execution. The opportunity presented itself in the form of the annual Founders Gala. The centerpiece of the school's historical display was meant to be a student project. Luca, encouraged by Ms. Sharma, had volunteered. For 3 weeks, he had worked tirelessly in a small, disused classroom, the air thick with the smell of balsa wood and glue. His project was a breathtakingly intricate 150-scale model of the original Northgate building, circa 1890. It was more than a model. It was a resurrection. He had spent hours in the school archives, poring over faded blueprints and sepia photographs, recreating every last detail: the tiny carved gargoyles, the delicate tracery of the chapel windows, the precise pattern of the roof slate. The project was a fusion of his secret passion and his new academic life. It was the first thing he had ever built here that felt truly his. He was putting the final touches on the miniature bell tower when the door creaked open. Grant Sterling entered, flanked by his ever-present acolytes Kyle and Ben. They didn't saunter in. They infested the room, their presence sucking the quiet, peaceful air from it. "Well, well," Grant began, his eyes scanning the room before landing on the model. He circled it like a shark. "Look at this. Little Romano building his little dollhouse." Luca stood up slowly, positioning himself between them and the table. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. "What do you want, Grant?" "Just came to see the masterpiece everyone's whispering about," Grant said, a malicious grin spreading across his face. "Ms. Sharma can't shut up about your hidden talents, but I don't know. Looks a little flimsy." He reached out a hand, flicking one of the delicate support columns of the main portico. "Don't touch it." Luca's voice was low, tight. "Or what?" Kyle sneered. "You gonna write a sad poem about it?" Grant's grin widened. This was the reaction he wanted. The fear, the anger. He reveled in it. "You know, Romano, my father sits on the board here. He helps decide who gets to stay and who gets to go. We're the ones who built this school. People like my family. People like us." He gestured between himself and his friends. Then his gaze dropped to Luca, his expression curdling into one of genuine disgust. "Not people like you." The air crackled. The unspoken had finally been made explicit. "You think because you can answer one question in class that you belong here?" Grant continued, his voice rising. "You think you can build a model of our history and make it your own?" He didn't wait for an answer. In one swift, violent motion, he shoved the edge of the table. The model, the product of weeks of painstaking labor, tilted, hung in the air for a horrifying second, and then crashed to the floor. The sound was a sickening crunch of shattered wood and broken dreams. The tiny bell tower snapped in half. The delicate windows imploded. 3 weeks of passion and precision, reduced to a pile of expensive kindling. Ben and Kyle whooped with savage glee. The destruction was absolute. Luca stared at the wreckage, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just wood and glue. It was his effort, his hope, the one beautiful thing he had managed to create in this cold, hostile place. A piece of his soul lay shattered on the dusty floor. He looked up at Grant, and for the first time, Grant saw something in Luca's eyes that wasn't fear. It wasn't anger either. It was something older, colder. "That's what you are," Grant spat, unnerved by the silence, but needing to have the last word. He searched for the cruelest thing he could find. A worthless charity case nigger, playing with things that don't belong to him. The slur hung in the air, uglier and more violent than the physical destruction. It was the final blow, designed to shatter what was left of Luca's spirit. But it didn't. Something inside Luca, some deep, dormant tectonic plate, shifted. The hurt, the humiliation, the loneliness. It all coalesced, not into tears or rage, but into a strange and terrible calm. The buzzing in his ears stopped. The room came into sharp focus. He looked at Grant Sterling, truly looked at him, and saw not a powerful prince, but a weak, frightened boy, so terrified of his own inadequacy that he had to destroy anything that reflected it. Luca's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes were ancient. He held Grant's gaze, his silence a profound, unnerving accusation. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The quiet contempt in his eyes was more powerful than any threat. He looked at Kyle, then at Ben, and they flinched, their celebratory smirks dissolving under the weight of his stare. They were bullies, used to provoking reactions of fear or fury. They had no script for this. This cold, absolute stillness. This was not the opinion of a sheep. This was the judgment of a lion. Panicked by the unfamiliar response, Grant grabbed his friends. "Let's go. I'm bored." They practically fled the room, leaving Luca alone with the ruins. He stood there for a long time, the silence ringing in his ears. He was no longer just a lonely boy trying to survive. He was the son of Marcello Romano. He was the son of Imani Romano. And he had just been shown, with perfect clarity, the face of his enemy. He couldn't go back. The quiet, invisible boy was gone, shattered on the floor along with his model. Something new, something harder and more resolute, was beginning to form in his place. In his downtown office, a sleek space of glass and steel that screamed legitimate enterprise, Mr. Sterling concluded a tense phone call. "I don't care what the projections say, liquidated it. I won't be intimidated by old ghosts, you hear me? The Romano family is a relic. This is my city now." He slammed the phone down, his face florid with anger. The deal was souring, and the whispers of his old, dangerous connections were getting louder. He needed to project strength, to crush any perceived weakness. His other line buzzed. It was Grant. "Hey, Dad, just wanted to let you know I handled that problem at school." "What problem?" Sterling asked, distracted. "The new kid, Romano, got a little too big for his britches. I put him back in his place." Grant's voice was puffed up with pride, recounting a censored version of the events, focusing on the supposed arrogance of Luca and his own role as a defender of the school's prestige. A slow smile spread across Mr. Sterling's face. This, at least, was good news. It was a small victory, but a satisfying one. "Good, son. That's my boy. You have to be ruthless with people like that. You give them an inch, and they think they own the place. You did the right thing. You reminded him what he is." He leaned back, a flicker of pleasure cutting through his anxiety. He was teaching his son the most important lesson: how to maintain power. The text message that arrived on Don Marcello Romano's phone was different this time. It wasn't a simple line of text. It was a picture, a photograph of the destroyed model on the classroom floor. The image was stark, a portrait of pointless cruelty. Marcello stared at it, his breathing perfectly even. His consigliere, a man named Turi, stood silently by the desk, having just delivered the weekly financial reports. He watched the Don's face, knowing better than to speak. He saw the flicker in the Don's eyes, a brief, hellish flare that was gone as quickly as it appeared. The phone rang a moment later. It was the assistant groundsman. The call was brief. The man recounted the events, his voice a flat monotone, ending with the racial slur Grant had used. Marcello listened without a word. When the man was finished, a long silence stretched over the line. Turi could feel the temperature in the room drop by 10 degrees. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken violence. He could practically hear the gears turning in the Don's mind, the quiet calculus of retribution. He imagined Sterling's businesses burning, his reputation ruined, the boy Grant learning a lesson in a dark alley that he would carry for the rest of his miserable life. But when Marcello finally spoke, his voice was unnervingly calm. "Continue to watch," he said. Turi's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Do nothing," Marcello continued, his voice as soft as falling snow and just as cold. The insult was to the boy. The response must begin with him. The boy must choose his own path first. He hung up the phone. He looked again at the picture of Imani on his wall. Her strength was not in retaliation, but in resilience. He had taught Luca how to think, how to strategize, how to see the world not as it was, but as it could be. He had given his son the mind of a lion. Now the world would see if he had the heart of one too. The guardian would remain unseen. For now. Grant Sterling was not accustomed to feeling fear. Annoyance, boredom, entitlement. These were the familiar currents of his emotional life. But the chilling stillness of Luca Romano after the model's destruction had planted a seed of something cold and unsettling in his gut. He had expected tears, rage, a satisfying crumpling of spirit. Instead, he got judgment. He saw it replayed in his mind. That quiet, unwavering gaze that seemed to see right through him, stripping away the Sterling name, the money, the bravado, and leaving only the hollow, pathetic core. Fear for a Sterling was a sensation to be immediately expunged. The best defense, as his father had always taught him, was a ruthless offense. He couldn't allow Luca's version of events, the truth, to ever see the light of day. He had to control the narrative, to paint Luca not as a victim, but as a villain. The upcoming midterm history exam, the one taught by the adoring Ms. Sharma, provided the perfect stage. The frame-up was both crude and cunning. During the exam, Grant created a small disturbance on the opposite side of the room, drawing the proctor's attention for a critical few seconds. In that window, he slipped a meticulously prepared cheat sheet under the edge of Luca's desk. Afterwards, he approached Ms. Sharma with a performance of high-minded concern, claiming he saw Luca referencing notes during the test. He knew his father's position on the board would ensure the accusation was taken with the utmost seriousness. The summons came the next day. A crisp, formal note delivered by a student aide, requesting Luca's presence in Headmaster Albright's office. Luca read the note, and the cold knot that had lived in his stomach since the model's destruction tightened. He knew, with absolute certainty, that this was the other shoe dropping. Headmaster Albright's office was a shrine to Northgate's legacy. Dark mahogany walls were covered in portraits of stern-faced men, and the air was thick with the scent of old paper and lemon polish. The room felt designed to intimidate. When Luca entered, he saw the trap was already set. The headmaster sat behind his imposing desk, his expression grave. Ms. Sharma stood near the window, her arms crossed, her face a mask of professional neutrality that didn't quite hide her concern. But the key players were in the two leather chairs facing the desk. Mr. Sterling, looking imposing and severe in a tailored suit, and his son Grant, who was expertly feigning a look of troubled reluctance. "Mr. Romano, thank you for coming," Headmaster Albright began, his voice heavy. "Please have a seat." Luca sat, his back straight, his hands resting calmly in his lap. "An accusation has been made," the headmaster continued, steepling his fingers. "A serious one. It has been alleged that you cheated on yesterday's history midterm." Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, a sound like gravel grinding. "Alleged? William, my son saw him. It's a simple, open and shut case of academic fraud, an insult to the school's honor code. My son is a victim here," Mr. Sterling went on, his voice resonating with manufactured outrage. "Forced to sit in a room with a cheat, and then forced into the uncomfortable position of having to report him. I expect the school to take swift and decisive action. Expulsion is the only appropriate response." "Let us first hear what Mr. Romano has to say," Ms. Sharma interjected, her tone crisp. She glanced at Luca, a flicker of encouragement in her eyes. Luca turned his gaze from the headmaster to Grant. "I didn't cheat," His voice was even, devoid of the panic they expected. "Of course you'd say that," Grant scoffed, shaking his head with theatrical disappointment. "He had a piece of paper right under his desk. I saw him look down at it multiple times." The headmaster slid a small folded piece of paper across the desk. It was the cheat sheet. "This was found taped to the underside of your desk after the exam, Luca. It contains notes, dates, and direct quotes from the textbook." Luca looked at the paper but didn't touch it. He could feel the walls of the trap closing in. They had a witness, they had evidence. He had only his word. And in this room, his word was worth nothing. He took a slow, steadying breath. His father's words echoed in his mind. "The lion does not concern himself with the opinion of the sheep." But this wasn't about opinions. This was a strategic attack. It required a strategic defense. He looked at Ms. Sharma, then at the headmaster. "May I see the paper?" Headmaster Albright pushed it closer. Luca picked it up, his movements deliberate. He unfolded it and scanned the contents, his eyes moving with incredible speed. For a full 30 seconds, the only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Mr. Sterling's smirk grew more confident with every tick. Then, Luca looked up. "This isn't my handwriting." "A weak denial," Mr. Sterling snapped. "Anyone could fake a different script." "Perhaps," Luca said calmly. "But you can't fake knowledge, or a lack of it." He turned to Headmaster Albright. "Sir, do you recall the seating chart for the exam?" The headmaster, taken aback by the question, nodded. "Yes, it's standard procedure. I was in seat 3B. Grant was in 6F across the aisle and 2 rows back. The proctor, Mr. Evans, spent most of the exam near the front of the room by the door. Between 10:15 and 10:20 a.m., there was a disturbance near the back. A student had a nosebleed. Mr. Evans was occupied for several minutes." Mr. Sterling's smirk faltered. The level of detail was unnerving. Luca continued, his voice gaining a quiet, inexorable momentum. "This cheat sheet is very detailed. It even contains a specific note about the Flavian Amphitheater's hypogum, the network of tunnels under the Colosseum." He looked directly at Ms. Sharma. "You and I discussed the hypogum after class last Tuesday, Ms. Sharma. It was not in the textbook reading assigned for this midterm. It was supplemental information for a project I was working on." Ms. Sharma's eyes widened slightly in realization. "However," Luca said, turning his attention back to the cheat sheet, "there is one fascinating detail on this paper. It mentions the Edict of Milan, giving its date as 313 AD, and it makes a note of its primary architects, Constantine and Licinius. This is all correct." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "But it also includes a short, bullet-pointed analysis of the edict's political ramifications, specifically referencing its impact on Nicomedean trade routes. A very specific analysis." Luca laid the paper flat on the desk. "This analysis was the subject of a guest lecture 2 weeks ago. I was not present for that lecture. I was excused for a dental appointment. I have the note from the school nurse." He looked at Grant, whose face had gone pale. But Grant was there. In fact, he asked the lecturer a question about those very trade routes. "I know because my friend Sam told me about it. He said it was the only question asked all hour because everyone else was falling asleep." The room was utterly silent now, save for the frantic ticking of the clock. Luca had not raised his voice. He had not pleaded or raged. He had simply laid out the facts, one by one, constructing a case as solid and inescapable as a Roman aqueduct. He had used his memory, a gift he'd always had, a mind trained by his father to see patterns and retain details, not as a parlor trick, but as a weapon. Headmaster Albright stared at Luca, then at the cheat sheet, then at a pasty-faced Grant Sterling. He was a man who had presided over generations of student disputes, but he had never seen a defense like this. It was brilliant. It was irrefutable. Ms. Sharma could no longer contain her expression. A slow smile of immense pride and vindication spread across her face. She had known. She had known there was a formidable mind behind that quiet exterior. But it was Mr. Sterling's reaction that was the most profound. He wasn't just angry, he was shaken to his core. The surgical precision, the calm dissection of a lie, the strategic use of memory and logic. It was terrifyingly familiar. It was the way they operated. The way the old man, Marcello Romano, had dismantled his rivals for decades, not with bullets, but with information, turning their own greed and lies against them. He had seen it happen before, in smoky back rooms where deals were made and men were broken. He had built his legitimate empire as a way to escape that world, to launder his past. And now, here was that same terrifying intellect, that same strategic mind, looking at him out of the eyes of a teenage boy. A black boy who was supposed to be a nobody, a piece of dust to be swept away. He wasn't just Grant's schoolyard rival. He was a Romano, a ghost from the past, sitting in the headmaster's office, threatening to unravel everything. Mr. Sterling's prejudice, his arrogance, it all curdled into a new, more potent emotion, fear. And fear, for a man like Sterling, always manifested as rage. "This is an absurd fantasy," he blustered, rising from his chair. "A conspiracy theory. This boy is a pathological liar, and he has now slandered my son." "Mr. Sterling, please," the headmaster said, his voice now firm. He looked at Grant, who refused to make eye contact, his gaze fixed on a point on the expensive Persian rug. "Grant, is what Mr. Romano said true? Were you at that lecture?" Grant couldn't speak. He just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was over. The trap had not only failed, it had sprung back on its creator. Mr. Sterling looked at Luca, his eyes burning with a venomous, personal hatred. This was no longer about schoolyard dominance or racial animosity. This was about survival. He pointed a trembling finger at Luca. "You have made a very powerful enemy today, young man," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. "A very powerful one." He grabbed his son by the arm and stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed like a declaration of war. In the ringing silence, Luca finally allowed himself to breathe. He had survived. But as he met the headmaster's stunned gaze, he knew this was only the beginning. He had unveiled his mind, and in doing so, had unveiled a much more dangerous foe. Grant Sterling, despite his humiliating defeat in Headmaster Albright's office, was not one to admit fault or relinquish power. His father, a man whose legitimate business empire was merely a polished facade for far shadier dealings, had instilled in him a brutal, unyielding belief in absolute dominance. The incident with the cheat sheet, far from humbling Grant, had only intensified his venom. Luca Romano, the quiet, unassuming black kid, had dared to expose him, to shame him in front of his own father and the school's authorities. This was an affront that demanded a public, inescapable retaliation. Mr. Sterling, still smarting from the unexpected intellectual thrashing Luca had delivered, agreed. His initial anger had morphed into a chilling recognition. Luca's precise, methodical dismantling of Grant's lie had reminded him too much of the old days, of Marcello Romano's chillingly effective information network and his uncanny ability to turn an opponent's strengths into their fatal weaknesses. It was a familiar, unwelcome ghost from a past he had worked tirelessly to bury. The boy was dangerous, a threat not just to Grant's standing, but potentially to the carefully constructed Sterling legacy. He needed to be neutralized, publicly and irrevocably, before his peculiar intelligence could truly blossom into something uncontrollable. Thus, the Northgate Annual History Decathlon was conceived. It was Mr. Sterling's brainchild, masquerading as a school-wide academic initiative. Ostensibly, it was designed to foster intellectual rigor and healthy competition. In reality, it was a perfectly constructed trap for Luca. The topic, conveniently chosen by the founding sponsor, Mr. Sterling himself, was ancient civilizations, power, politics, and the art of war. A thinly veiled invitation for Grant to showcase his supposedly superior knowledge of Roman history, the very subject of Luca's destroyed model. The announcement came with fanfare, an assembly addressed by Headmaster Albright himself, standing alongside a beaming Mr. Sterling. The headmaster, though initially skeptical, had been swayed by Mr. Sterling's substantial donation to the school's new library wing, a sum so generous it effectively silenced any ethical qualms. Ms. Sharma, however, watched the proceedings with a growing sense of dread. She knew the undercurrents, the unspoken rivalry that this competition was designed to exploit. She caught Luca's eye across the auditorium. He met her gaze with a placid expression, giving nothing away, but she saw the subtle tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible clenching of his jaw. He understood. The arena for this ultimate test was the Grand Assembly Hall, Northgate's most imposing venue. Its vaulted ceilings, stained glass windows depicting classical scholars, and rows of polished oak benches usually hosted graduation ceremonies and solemn speeches. Now it was transformed into a gladiatorial coliseum of intellect, designed to highlight one boy's triumph and another's spectacular downfall. Banners emblazoned with the school crest hung from the rafters, ironically proclaiming, "Knowledge is power." Grant, with his usual theatrical flair, immediately registered for the decathlon, positioning himself as the favorite. He spent hours in the school library, not genuinely researching, but being fed carefully curated information by a team of private tutors hired by his father. These were not just rote facts. They were obscure details, specific interpretations, and complex historical debates that only a seasoned academic would know. Mr. Sterling wanted to ensure Grant had an insurmountable advantage. He wanted to crush Luca, not just defeat him. Luca, on the other hand, made no grand declarations. He continued his routine, spending his evenings not with tutors, but with his tattered history books, his mind absorbing every nuance, every forgotten footnote. He saw the decathlon for what it was, a public execution disguised as a competition. And he knew, with chilling clarity, that he was utterly alone in this. Ms. Sharma offered words of encouragement, discreetly sharing some advanced reading materials, but she couldn't be his coach, his strategist. This battle was his to fight, his to win or lose, against the full might and machinations of the Sterling family. The pervasive sense of Luca's solitude was palpable in the days leading up to the event. His fellow students, sensing the shift in the school's political climate, largely avoided him. Some whispered condolences, others openly mocked him. Even Ethan, the shy new student Luca had helped, seemed hesitant to approach him directly, though he offered fleeting, sympathetic glances. The invisible barrier that had always separated Luca from his peers now felt like an unbreachable wall, built brick by brick with doubt and prejudice. He spent his lunch breaks in the quietest corners of the library, poring over ancient texts, his absorption in history a shield against the mounting pressure. The day of the decathlon dawned gray and ominous. The air in the assembly hall was thick with anticipation. Every student, every faculty member, and a significant number of parents, including a formidable contingent from the Sterling family, were present. The pressure on Luca was immense, a physical weight. He could feel the eyes on him, a mixture of curiosity, pity, and thinly veiled disdain. He was the underdog, the black boy from a mysteriously quiet background, pitted against the school's golden child. The narrative had been carefully crafted. Grant, the diligent scholar, against Luca, the suspected cheat, now given an impossible chance to redeem himself. Headmaster Albright, attempting to maintain an air of impartiality, briefly outlined the rules. The decathlon would consist of 3 rounds, a rapid-fire Q&A, a detailed essay analysis, and a final direct debate. Each round had a strict time limit. This was the crucial element, the ticking clock. It was designed to exacerbate stress, to force quick, unthinking answers, and to expose any gaps in knowledge. For Grant, who was rehearsed and primed, it was an advantage. For Luca, it was a gauntlet, a relentless assault on his composure. The first round, the rapid-fire Q&A, began. Grant, his posture radiating confidence, answered every question with practiced ease, rattling off dates, names, and events. When it was Luca's turn, the questions became noticeably more obscure, requiring not just recall but nuanced understanding. Luca, however, remained calm. His voice was steady, his answers concise and precise. He didn't rush, didn't falter. He simply answered, each correct response chipping away at the carefully constructed narrative of his intellectual inferiority. Then came the essay analysis. A complex historical document, an obscure decree from the Roman Empire, was projected onto the large screen. Both contestants had 20 minutes to analyze its political and social implications. Grant approached it with a formulaic precision, regurgitating prepared arguments. Luca, however, seemed to vanish into the text. He didn't just analyze. He interpreted, connecting the ancient decree to broader themes of power and human nature, drawing parallels to modern concepts, revealing layers of meaning that Grant completely missed. He used his deep, intuitive understanding of history to see beyond the surface, a skill cultivated not just from books, but from a lifetime of observing human dynamics, a subtle inheritance from his family's less academic business. As the clock ticked down to the final debate, the atmosphere in the hall became electric. Grant, increasingly frustrated by Luca's unexpected resilience, leaned into his pre-planned attack. His opening statement was a polished condemnation of historical figures who gained power through deception and manipulation, a thinly veiled jab at Luca's alleged cheating incident. He spoke with the conviction of a performer, his voice resonating with indignation. Luca, however, did not respond with indignation. He stood quietly, his eyes sweeping across the audience, taking in every face, every expression. He seemed to be assessing, analyzing, preparing not for a debate, but for something far more profound. The ticking of the clock seemed to grow louder, filling the vast hall, a relentless countdown to the inevitable confrontation. The stage was set. The audience held its breath, and in that moment, Luca Romano, the quiet, underestimated son of a powerful shadow, faced his ultimate test, completely alone. The air in the Grand Assembly Hall was so thick with anticipation, one could almost taste it. Grant Sterling had just delivered his opening statement, a carefully rehearsed diatribe disguised as historical analysis. His voice, amplified by the hall's acoustics, had resonated with a manufactured indignation, painting a subtle but unmistakable picture of Luca as a deceitful schemer, a master manipulator of facts and narratives. The crowd, largely swayed by the Sterling family's influence and Grant's polished delivery, murmured in agreement. Doubt still clung to Luca like a shroud, despite his earlier strong showing. This was the moment of truth, the final debate, and Grant believed he had delivered the killing blow. Luca, however, did not flinch. He walked to the podium with a quiet, almost imperceptible grace, his dark skin a stark contrast to the pale wood. He didn't begin with a counter-argument. Instead, he simply stood, his gaze sweeping across the sea of faces before him. He saw the skeptical frowns, the pitying glances, the outright disdain. He saw Ms. Sharma in the front row, her hands clasped tightly, a silent plea in her eyes. And in the very first row, he saw Mr. Sterling, a smug, triumphant sneer plastered across his face, confident in his son's impending victory. A full 10 seconds passed in absolute silence, a silence so profound it felt like the entire hall was holding its breath. The only sound was the relentless ticking of the large grandfather clock at the back of the stage, each tick a hammer blow against the mounting tension. Grant Sterling shifted impatiently, a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. He thought Luca was faltering, crumbling under the pressure. Then Luca began to speak. His voice, though soft at first, carried effortlessly through the hall, clear and resonant, utterly devoid of fear or defensiveness. He didn't directly address Grant's accusations. Instead, he began to weave a narrative, a masterclass in historical storytelling. History, Luca began, his eyes fixed on a point far beyond the back wall, as if gazing into the past itself, is not merely a collection of dates and names. It is the echoes of human ambition, human frailty, human courage. And just as in life, in history, the most dangerous deceptions are often cloaked in the guise of truth, presented by those who seek to control the narrative. He then pivoted, addressing the precise question Grant had posed, a question about the Punic Wars, specifically a minor, often overlooked skirmish on the coast of Sicily, a seemingly insignificant detail designed to trip up even the most seasoned historian. Grant had chosen it because it was obscure, a factoid that his private tutors had assured him no one, especially not Luca, would know. But Luca knew, and he didn't just rattle off facts. He began to describe the scene, slowing down the pace, each word a brushstroke painting a vivid picture. Imagine the year 264 BC, he narrated, his voice now imbued with a quiet intensity. The scorching Sicilian sun beating down on weary Roman legionaries, fresh off the boats. They were not seasoned naval fighters. Their strength was on land. Across the bay, the Carthaginian fleet, sleek and deadly, commanded the waves. And in that moment, A desperate Roman general, Gaius Duilius, knew his land-based might was useless without naval superiority. Luca paused, letting the image hang in the air. Now Mr. Sterling mentioned the Battle of Messana. He continued, turning his gaze not to Grant, but directly to Mr. Sterling, the elder. A minor engagement indeed, but what he perhaps overlooked or chose to omit was the Corvus. A ripple of confusion went through the audience. Even Ms. Sharma leaned forward, her brow furrowed. The Corvus was a little-known Roman invention, a boarding bridge with a heavy spike, allowing land soldiers to fight naval battles as if they were on solid ground. It was an ingenious, almost desperate innovation. The Corvus, Luca explained, his voice gaining momentum, was not elegant. It was clumsy, ungainly. It made the Roman ships top-heavy and vulnerable in storms. But it transformed the nature of naval warfare. It allowed the Romans, who were weaker at sea, to negate Carthage's naval advantage. It was, in essence, a weapon of adaptation, born from necessity, used by an underdog to level the playing field against a seemingly insurmountable foe. He took a step forward, his eyes blazing with a quiet fire. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the true lesson of history. Not just who won, but how they won. Not just the facts, but the strategy, the ingenuity, the will to overcome adversity when all odds are stacked against you. He then looked directly at Grant, his gaze piercing. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "you spoke of manipulation. But true manipulation is to present a partial truth, to highlight facts that serve your narrative, while conveniently omitting those that reveal the full, complex picture." Luca then delivered the nintho, bated breath, moment, the one where everything seemed to fall apart before the miraculous turnaround. "Indeed," Luca continued, his voice resonating with an almost disarming honesty, "the Corvus was indeed heavy and led to many Roman shipwrecks. It was a flawed invention. And for a moment, during the very first deployment of the Corvus in a major battle, it actually failed. The spikes jammed. The bridge couldn't swing into place. The Roman fleet was exposed, vulnerable, on the verge of being decimated. The Carthaginian admiral, Hannibal Gisco, thought victory was assured. He gave the order to advance, to crush the Roman line. A collective gasp went through the hall. Grant Sterling's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock on his face. This wasn't in his notes. "But then," Luca continued, his voice rising, "in that single desperate moment, a young Roman centurion, not a general, not a senator, but a simple foot soldier, realizing the mechanical failure, seized a spare mast. With raw strength and desperate ingenuity, he improvised a lever, manually dislodging the jammed Corvus on his own ship. It was a single, heroic act, seen by only a handful, but it allowed that first Corvus to drop, catching the lead Carthaginian ship by surprise. The rest, as they say, is history." Luca finished, his voice now calm, yet carrying the weight of his conviction. He hadn't just answered the question. He had turned it into a powerful metaphor for his own struggle, for the fight of the underestimated against the arrogant, for the triumph of true ingenuity over manufactured superiority. He had not just unveiled a fact, but a philosophy. The hall was silent for another beat, processing the sheer depth and unexpected brilliance of Luca's response. Then, a single person in the back row started to clap, slowly, deliberately. It was Ethan, the shy boy Luca had helped. His claps were quickly joined by others, a ripple effect that swelled into a thunderous standing ovation. The reactions of the witnesses were a symphony of shifting emotions. Ms. Sharma was openly weeping, tears of pride streaming down her face as she clapped harder than anyone. Headmaster Albright, who had remained impassive throughout the proceedings, slowly rose to his feet, a look of profound respect transforming his grave expression into one of genuine admiration. Faculty members, who had quietly sided with Sterling, now looked at each other in stunned amazement, their skepticism evaporating into awe. Students cheered, stomping their feet, captivated by the raw intellect and quiet strength Luca had displayed. Grant Sterling stood frozen at his podium, his face a mask of disbelief, then humiliation, then outright fury. He had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and utterly exposed. His meticulously constructed facade had crumbled under the weight of Luca's authentic brilliance. But it was Mr. Sterling who truly embodied the climax of reaction. The smug sneer vanished from his face, replaced by a ghastly pallor. His eyes, fixed on Luca, were no longer just angry or fearful. They were filled with a cold, terrifying recognition. He wasn't just seeing a boy who had defeated his son, he was seeing the ghost of Marcello Romano. The strategic mind, the ability to turn a seemingly insurmountable disadvantage into a decisive victory, the uncanny knack for finding the weak point in a seemingly flawless plan. It was all there, in the quiet, resolute figure of Luca. It was the same ruthlessness, the same intellectual precision that had defined the old patriarch, the very qualities Mr. Sterling had tried to escape by building his legitimate empire. A low growl rumbled in Mr. Sterling's chest. He rose slowly from his seat, his fists clenched, his gaze burning with a venomous personal hatred that transcended the academic competition. This was no longer about a school decathlon. This was about power, legacy, and a deeply buried fear rising to the surface. He turned and stormed out of the hall, shoving past bewildered parents, his exit a violent punctuation mark to Luca's triumph. Luca watched him go, his expression unreadable. He had won. He had cleared his name, proven his worth, and gained the respect of his peers. But as the cheers continued to wash over him, a cold certainty settled in his heart. The battle for his reputation was over. The true war, the one with the Sterling family, had just begun. The thunderous applause that had erupted in the Grand Assembly Hall slowly, reluctantly, began to die down. Luca stood at the podium, a quiet figure amidst the lingering echoes of triumph. The vindication was sweet, a potent antidote to the weeks of whispers and the humiliation of false accusations. Students rushed forward, some apologetic, others simply eager to shake his hand, their faces radiating newfound respect. Ms. Sharma approached him, her eyes still glistening with tears, pulling him into a brief, heartfelt hug. "I knew it, Luca," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I always knew." Headmaster Albright, his posture now radiating a quiet gravitas rather than the usual cautious neutrality, stepped back to the podium. His voice, typically a study in practiced diplomacy, held a new, uncharacteristic firmness. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his gaze sweeping across the still buzzing hall, "the Northgate Annual History Decathlon has concluded, and our victor, by unanimous consent of the judging panel, is Luca Romano." A fresh wave of applause, perhaps even more fervent than before, washed over the room. But the most significant part of the resolution unfolded away from the public eye, in the sterile, hushed corridors of power. Mr. Sterling's furious exit from the assembly hall was not merely a display of temper. It was the beginning of his undoing. His outburst, witnessed by dozens of influential parents and school board members, served as a catalyst. The carefully maintained facade of the benevolent philanthropist had cracked, revealing the ruthless, volatile man beneath. Word of Mr. Sterling's behavior, coupled with Luca's undeniable brilliance, quickly spread beyond Northgate's gates. Investigative journalists, long suspicious of Sterling Industries' opaque dealings, suddenly found new motivation. The public spectacle of Mr. Sterling's rage, juxtaposed with the quiet dignity of a black student, provided a compelling narrative. Within days, whispers turned into murmurs, then into shouts. Unethical business practices, questionable investments, and even outright fraudulent schemes that Mr. Sterling had meticulously buried under layers of legal jargon and shell corporations began to resurface. The public humiliation at Northgate had made him reckless, drawing unwanted attention to his carefully constructed house of cards. The downfall of the antagonist, Mr. Sterling, was swift and symmetrical to his transgressions. His empire, built on a foundation of greed and manipulation, began to crumble under the weight of legal investigations and public outcry. He lost lucrative contracts, faced asset freezes, and ultimately was hit with multiple lawsuits from former partners and defrauded investors. His carefully cultivated reputation was shattered. Within months, his business empire was in ruins, and he faced the very real threat of criminal charges. He would lose everything he had so ruthlessly amassed, reduced to the very kind of societal pariah he had so often created. Grant Sterling, already humiliated, found himself adrift in the wake of his father's catastrophic fall. He was suspended from Northgate Academy indefinitely, his academic future in jeopardy. The money and influence that had always shielded him vanished, leaving him exposed and friendless. The sycophants who had once flocked to him quickly abandoned ship. He had to transfer to a less prestigious public school, far from the gilded cages of Northgate. His privilege had evaporated, and he was forced to confront a reality where his name no longer guaranteed impunity. His punishment was not a legal one, but a social and academic reckoning, fitting for someone whose arrogance stemmed solely from his family's position. For Luca, the new calm brought not just relief, but unprecedented opportunities. Headmaster Albright, genuinely impressed and perhaps eager to make amends for the school's initial misjudgment, personally offered Luca a full-ride scholarship to Northgate Academy, covering tuition, board, and all expenses. It wasn't just about financial aid. It was a profound acknowledgement of his intellectual merit and character. More importantly, Luca was invited to join the school's prestigious Scholars Circle, a small elite group of students mentored directly by the headmaster and top faculty members, allowing him to truly flourish academically. This was far more meaningful than any material reward. It was a chance to finally, truly belong, to be recognized for his mind. Later that week, Luca sat with Ms. Sharma in her quiet, book-lined classroom. The late afternoon sun filtered through the window, painting stripes across the wooden floor. Ms. Sharma poured them both cups of tea. "You know, Luca," she began, her voice soft, "when you first arrived, I saw a quiet, brilliant mind. But I also saw a boy who carried a great weight, a boy who seemed to actively avoid attention." Luca took a sip of his tea, the warmth spreading through him. "My father always taught me that true power is unseen, that drawing attention to yourself makes you a target." He paused, a faint, almost rueful smile touching his lips. "He also said the most dangerous battles are won before they're ever fought, with information and strategy." Ms. Sharma nodded slowly. "And you used that wisdom, not to manipulate, but to unveil the truth, to defend yourself. You didn't just win a debate, Luca. You stood up for what was right, and you brought down a Goliath in the process." Luca looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the quiet wisdom of someone who had learned a profound lesson. "I suppose I learned that some battles have to be fought publicly, that sometimes you have to show your hand, even if it makes you a target, to protect what matters, or to protect yourself." He thought of the ruined model, of the unfair accusation, of the cold, dismissive glances. It's hard to be unseen when you're constantly being looked through, isn't it? "Indeed," Ms. Sharma agreed, her gaze warm and empathetic. "And you showed them that looking through you was their mistake. You showed them a legend." She reached across the table, gently touching his hand. "You didn't just find your place at Northgate, Luca. You changed it. For the better." The conversation was brief, reflective, and profound. It solidified the bond between them, a mentor and a student who had both witnessed and participated in a pivotal moment. Luca felt a sense of peace settle over him, a calm born not of avoidance, but of earned respect and hard-won victory. He had navigated the storm, and though scars remained, he had emerged stronger, more visible, and ready for whatever lay ahead. The setting sun cast long golden shadows across the meticulously manicured lawns of Sterling Hall, a stately building on the campus of Columbia University. It was a cruel irony that Luca Romano, now a distinguished graduate student in international law and history, often found himself attending lectures and seminars within walls still bearing the name of the family who had once sought to break him. Yet, for Luca, it was a subtle, satisfying testament to how much things had changed. He wasn't just surviving in their world, he was excelling, redefining success on his own terms. Luca was no longer the quiet, solitary figure he had been at Northgate. His intellect, once a hidden weapon, was now a celebrated asset. He had a close-knit circle of friends, a vibrant intellectual community that respected him not for a hidden lineage, but for his sharp mind, his insightful perspectives, and his quiet, unwavering integrity. He still carried a sense of purpose, but the burden of proof had lifted. He was seen, truly seen, for who he was. His days were filled with rigorous academic pursuits, delving into the complexities of global politics, ancient legal systems, and the intricate dance of power that shaped civilizations. He was preparing for a career that combined his passion for history with his innate strategic thinking, perhaps in international diplomacy or human rights advocacy. He had found a way to channel the lessons of his family's past, the understanding of influence, leverage, and the hidden currents of society, into a force for good. He was building his own legacy, one brick at a time, founded on justice and knowledge. Paying it forward, Bat Buok. One crisp autumn evening, Luca stood before a diverse group of high school students in a community center auditorium in Harlem. This was the inaugural session of the Phoenix Scholarship and Mentorship Program, an initiative Luca had co-founded with Ms. Sharma. The program was specifically designed to identify and support academically gifted students from underserved communities, particularly those facing prejudice or systemic barriers. Its mission was to provide not just financial aid, but also mentorship, academic guidance, and a safe space where talent could flourish, unburdened by external pressures or internal doubts. Luca, dressed in a sharp but understated suit, looked out at the eager, nervous faces. He remembered being them, full of potential but lacking the clear path, or the confidence to seize it. His voice, calm and reassuring, filled the room. 5 years ago, he began, I stood in a place not unlike this, feeling isolated, misunderstood, and targeted. My worth was questioned, not because of my abilities, but because of who I was perceived to be. What I learned then, what I want you to remember, is that your mind is your greatest weapon. Your integrity is your strongest shield. And your story, no matter how challenging it seems now, is a testament to your resilience. He spoke of the power of knowledge, the importance of critical thinking, and the courage it takes to stand up for oneself and for truth. He didn't dwell on his past grievances, but used his experience as a springboard for inspiration, emphasizing that adversity could forge strength. Among the students in the front row, a young man with a familiar earnestness in his eyes listened intently. It was Ethan, now a bright, confident high school senior, ready to apply for college, who had volunteered to help coordinate the program's first cohort. Ethan caught Luca's eye and offered a broad, grateful smile. He was living proof of the program's potential, a testament to the ripple effect of one person's kindness and resilience. As the session concluded, Luca watched the students, their faces alight with newfound hope and determination, filing out of the auditorium. He walked over to a large window, looking out at the city lights twinkling against the night sky. High above, a single star shone brightly, a beacon in the vast expanse. It was a silent, powerful reminder of the light that always finds a path, even in the deepest darkness, and of the profound, lasting impact one quiet, courageous soul could have on the world. Luca Romano was not just a legend returned. He was a legend in the making, building a future where intelligence and integrity always triumphed over ignorance and prejudice. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies, and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.